Russian tanks are disappearing from the battlefield, not because they're obsolete, but because they're being hunted. FPV drones have turned the front lines into slaughterhouses. Steel giants that once defined modern warfare are now fleeing the fight. Russia isn't deploying tanks anymore because they're getting shredded before they can even fire. This isn't just a tactical shift, it's the death of an era, from game changer to death trap. Here's why the tank is finished and what that means for the wars of tomorrow. By July of 2025, Ukraine's general staff put the number of destroyed Russian tanks at a staggering 9,760. The independent website Oryx, which tracks losses of military equipment, using geolocated images and video from the battlefield, puts the number at 3,690. At the start of 2022, the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated that Russia had around 17,500 tanks in reserve, including a mix of more modern T-90s, T-80s, T-72s, and older T-64s, T-62s, and T-55s. So, if the General Staff's figures are accurate, Russia has lost over 55% of its tanks ATAN, overall rate of about 1 per day. But even if the lower Oryx figures, which are incomplete due to the size of rigorous methodology, are correct, Russia has lost a fifth of its tank stockpile in just over 1,000 days. Russia has long since lost its ability to cover its tank losses with new production. Newer tanks, like the latest T-90M Paray and T-72BM, are still lumbering off the production line with a new batch of T-90M delivered for the new year. But these have been wholly insufficient to keep up with the losses. So, Russia has been pulling older tanks out of storage, hastily refurbishing them, and sending them off, knowing very well that they will be turned into scrap in the killing fields of eastern Ukraine. A case in point is the T-80BVM. A batch of these supposedly new main battle tanks was delivered by the manufacturer Eurogod in June. But it's not exactly new. It's a refitted version of the T-80B, which entered service back in 1976. It has an upgraded 125mm gun which can fire the 9mm 119 Minvar anti-tank missile, an upgraded engine, slightly better protection, new tracks, new radio equipment, and other bits and bobs. But it's essentially our refurbished Cold War-era tank, and Russia can only make a maximum of a few dozen of them every month. Moreover, satellite imagery reveals that Russia's tank stores have been massively depleted as ever older models have been pulled out of storage, refurbished, and shipped to the front lines. Analysts estimate that in 2022, Russia refurbished and produced around 1,500 tanks. In 2024, this number was just 600, while in 2025, it will decline to about 400. In the second half of 2025, it is believed that the Russian tank industry will be able to cover no more than 30% of the losses in Ukraine. There are simply fewer and fewer tanks that can be revived, and because the condition of the tanks being refurbished is becoming ever poorer, the process takes longer. Little wonder, then, that fewer and fewer Russian tanks are being seen on the front lines. But what's caused this weapon, which for decades has symbolized military strength, to become something more akin to a heavy lumbering death trap? In part, particularly due to the first year of the war, the answer lies in effective Ukrainian tactics. The Russian army that rolled into Ukraine in February 2022 was led by as many as 2,000 tanks, including some of the latest T-72 and T-90 models. Each had 3 crew members and a 125mm stabilized main gun and weighed more than 40 tons. But tanks were leading the defense as well. Around 1,000 Ukrainian tanks, including locally made T-64s, also with 3 crew members and a stabilized 125mm gun, met the Russian force. First, they battled it to a standstill. Then they counterattacked and, over the next 9 months, drove the Russians back to the front lines in southern and eastern Ukraine. In the initial phase of the war, the Russians lost around 1,000 tanks and the Ukrainians a couple of hundred. The weapons that killed those tanks were for the most part typical anti-tank weapons: mines, artillery, anti-tank missiles, and other tanks. But then, as the war ground on, something changed. Both sides, but particularly Ukraine, began weaponizing small drones, the kind you can buy online for a few hundred. Within a matter of months, warfare had changed forever, particularly the EU roll-off tanks. It turns out that the FPV drone is the perfect anti-tank weapon. For example, consider the US's M1 Abrams, which with its 120mm gun and powerful turbine engine is widely considered the world's most capable tank. It has composite armor, a blend of steel, and tungsten or uranium, plus other materials. In the front, this armor offers the same protection provided by 1,000mm of steel. But on top, the protection is equivalent to just 25mm of steel. What that means is that a well-placed strike from a drone costing a couple of hundred or thousand can destroy a $10 million 70-ton Abrams. Indeed, within weeks of the first M1 Abrams being delivered to Ukraine by the US in 2023, that's exactly what started happening. By mid-2024, it was reported that Ukraine had withdrawn its Abrams from the front lines due to the threat of drones. And by June of 2025, the Russian Ministry of Defense was claiming that all but 5 of the 31 Abrams delivered have been put out of action. Ukraine's other main NATO-supplied advanced battle tanks are also far from impervious to FPV drone attacks. By October 2024, Oryx was reporting that over half of the Leopard 2A4 and 2A6 tanks supplied to Ukraine were out of action, and reports indicated that these beasts were being seen far less frequently on the front lines. Now, if the world's most advanced tanks can't cope with the FPV drone attacks, imagine how badly the inferior Russian tank shave fared. Around 2/3 of Russia's tank losses are reportedly due to FPV drone attacks. In general, Ukraine has been forced to withdraw its tanks in much the same way as Russia, and for precisely the same reason, to protect them from FPV drone-created kill zones. That said, Ukraine has seen far fewer tank losses than Russia. That's in part down to the fact that Ukraine has mastered the art of FPV drone warfare first, and started withdrawing its tanks from the battlefield before the Russians did likewise. It's also in part down to the fact, besides its 8-month incursion into Russia's Kursk region and localized counterattacks, Ukraine has been playing defense against a Russian offensive since early 2024. And although, as Ukraine proved in 2022, tanks can be an effective first line of defense, especially against other tanks, they're primarily used for offensive purposes. But whether attacking or defending, on today's battlefield, tanks and pretty much everything else that enters an FPV kill zone are easy pickings. During Russia's grinding summer offensive of 2025, these kill zones have become an increasingly pivotal feature of the war, and their importance is only going to increase. As the Ukrainian OSINT channel officer put it on the Telegram app, by the beginning of 2026, the kill zone concept will be the main one on the battlefield. The nature of combat operations will undergo significant changes, and the role of UAV units will increase even more, and everything will depend on their competent and organized actions on the ability to independently conduct coordinated tactical actions, rather than the principle if you see it, hit it. If not, wait. So, infantry units get ready and drone operators train hard because the entire situation on the battlefield will depend on this. To a large extent, the situation on the battlefield already does. An FPV kill zone is created when either side manifesto accumulate sufficient stockpiles of FPV drones, drone operators, and ancillary equipment like reconnaissance drones, electronic warfare units, and charging stations to saturate an area. There are so many drones in the air at any time that literally, within seconds of an enemy movement being detected, deadly FPV drones are swooping down towards it. They can fly into trenches and buildings if the entrances are not protected. Soldiers complain that even popping outside for 30 seconds to empty one's bladder on a tree can be putting their life on the line. Some FPV drones are equipped with grenades, or landmines that can be dropped right on top of enemy troops or equipment. Most are packed with explosives and fly directly into targets before detonating. When enough of them are concentrated into an area of the front line, it becomes practically impossible to launch an assault of any meaningful size, as multiple videos of burnt-out columns of Russian tanks and armored vehicles can attest. As production, techniques on both sides have become more refined over time. The range and explosive power of these drones have improved, as have the skill set and experience of the operators. As a result, where before the widespread introduction of FPV drones, kill zones created by artillery, tanks, and infantry stretched for a few miles, they now stretch for up to 10. This has affected every aspect of the situation on the front lines. Take evacuation of the wounded, for example. Drones on both sides have no qualms about attacking each other's medical evacuation teams. It's become harder and harder to reach wounded soldiers at all, let alone quickly. Many more soldiers who could have been saved or patched up and returned to active duty are now dying before they can be treated or face amputations and other permanently debilitating injuries. For decades, improvement in medical technology and evacuation procedures have seen the ratio of wounded dead rise from 3.1 in World War II to between 10 and 15 to 1 during the Iraq War, at least on the US side. Given the fog of war over casualty numbers on both sides, it's hard to say exactly what the ratio is today for either Ukrainians or Russians, but it's definitely heading backwards as a result of these kill zones. Given that the Russians are on the offensive and the Ukrainians on the defensive, both sides are using FPV kill zones in different ways. The two different kill zone strategies are probably best illustrated around the cities of Povsk, Konstantin, and further north in Kapansk, which have been the key targets of Russia's summer offensive to date. Ukraine has established blanket kill zones, covering the northern, eastern, and southern flanks of these cities. On interactive maps tracking the incremental changes on the battlefield, it's evident how the Russians slowly and at great cost grind their way up to a certain point on the outskirts. Of these cities then are more or less stopped, or more accurately, they were stopped by Ukrainian kill zones. So, as long as Ukraine can maintain an adequate supply of drones, operators, and strongholds from which to operate, Russia could keep banging its head bloodily and pointlessly on the approaches to these cities indefinitely. In fact, if Ukraine had the manpower and drone stocks to cover the entire front line, it's likely the Russian offensive would have been stalled permanently by now. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Ukraine reportedly produced 5 million FPV drones in 2024 and is aiming to hit 8 million in 2025. Mind-bogglingly large as those numbers sound, they're not enough to cover the entire front for long. More importantly, with analysts putting Ukraine's frontline manpower deficit at between 70,000 and 100,000, it simply doesn't have the forces to create a kill zone along a 1,000 mi front. There are gaps, and that's where Russia is naturally trying to break through. For its part, Russia has focused on trying to set up FPV kill zones over key logistic routes, keeping these cities and the kill zones around them in business. Rather than attempting to storm these cities suicidally with columns of armor and infantry like earlier in the war, they've slowly but surely gained ground on the flanks of these cities. They intend to take strong positions and stock them with enough drones and operators to cut off all incoming supplies to these cities. It's like an old-fashioned siege aimed at ultimately starving the enemy out. They've also changed their tactics in how they deal with the Ukrainian kill zones. Traditionally, and during the earlier parts of the war, Russian offensives involved columns of armored vehicles attempting to burst through minefields and incoming artillery fire to land substantial numbers of infantry on or behind Ukrainian lines. Now they split their infantry into small groups of 2 or 3 soldiers each advancing on foot, motorbikes, or quad bikes. These missions are often completely suicidal, and there has reportedly been significant pushback, and even mutiny among frontline Russian forces. However, this strategy does serve 2 important purposes with respect to breaking through a kill zone. Firstly, it forces Ukraine to use up a lot more drones, taking out relatively low-value targets. Callous as it sounds, the life of Agront isn't worth anywhere near as much as a multi-million-dollar tank on either side. Secondly, it has enabled the Russians to capture nondescript village after nondescript village using a process that's been nicknamed painting by numbers. The small groups of infantry are watched over by reconnaissance drones as they advance. When Ukrainian forces spot the advancing troops, they attack them with FPV drones and, if available, artillery. This exposes the Ukrainian artillery and drone operators' positions. The Russians then hammer these positions with their own artillery, loitering munitions, and fab-glide bombs. When the Ukrainian barrage has been sufficiently muted, they move in with larger numbers of infantry and armored vehicles, clean up and raise Russian flags. Sometimes they even still use tanks, but cautiously. Indeed, in recent months, the war has spawned a new term, the cautious tank. Due to the threat of drones, Russian tanks are much more commonly used these days as a form of infantry support, or low-precision artillery. They're hidden in buildings, taken out to fire at enemy positions, or provide cover for an infantry advance, then hastily return to cover. Ukraine has also adopted a cautious tank approach, and in fact has restructured its tank divisions such that tanks are assuming a secondary role. Infantry and the armored trucks and track vehicles that speed them to and from their trenches now take on the lead role. In July 2025, the famed 1st Tank Brigade was reorganized to ostensibly have just 2 31 tank battalions instead of 3, but it added a 2nd Mechanized Battalion with on-paper 31 infantry fighting vehicles. The 17th Tank Brigade reorganized in October or November 2024, reducing its tank inventory to become the first of the Ukrainian Army's new heavy mechanized brigades. The 5th Tank Brigade underwent its own reorg in December. This all raises the question of whether the age of the tank is ending. Has the emergence of FPV kill zones made them entirely redundant in modern warfare? The short answer is no. For starters, tanks are still ferocious weapons against enemies that do not have the masses of FPV drones and expertise Ukraine does. They're still just as deadly in forests and other areas where FPV drones can't fly, as the multi-year battle for the Serebryansky forest near Severe has shown. More importantly, if this war has proven anything, it's the ability of both sides, particularly the Ukrainians, to adapt to battlefield realities and come up with innovations to change the status quo. Tank-building engineers around the world have taken heed of the lessons of the Ukrainian battlefield, and innovations to counter drones are already appearing on the battlefield. It's already become rare 2-spot tanks on either side that don't have the so-called cope cages attached. These are essentially wire grills fitted over the tanks that cause incoming FPV drones to explode some distance from the tank's armor, limiting the damage impact. While far from perfect protection, they do mean that it sometimes takes 3 to 5 drones to effectively stop a tank, as opposed to just one well-placed strike on a vulnerable area. The Russians have also started sporting some truly outrageous-looking vehicles that look like something out of a Mad Max movie. The so-called turtle tank looks like a massive wedge of metal on tracks with a gun sticking out. However, they do seem to be more effective at repelling drone attacks, if not minefields. Even more bizarre is the so-called zombie tank recently spotted, on the front lines. This ridiculous-looking, if menacing, beast apparently survived 60 drone hits before eventually being stopped by Landmine. The Russians have also been shopping their flagship T-90M Pro tank 8 international arms expos like IDEX 2025, touting its battlefield-tested anti-drone protection and electronic warfare systems. They're also shopping the new Kornet EM anti-tank missile, with optional remote control technology, suggesting that they don't foresee tanks becoming something they don't need to defend against anytime soon. The bottom line is that while for now Ukraine has managed to remove the Russian tank as a primary threat, the tank is still a critical item of battlefield equipment. It has evolved to cope with landmines, anti-tank missiles, and improved artillery. Over time, cunning tank engineers will likely develop FPV drone-proof tactics too. We'll keep you updated as the situation develops. So if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to make sure you keep your finger on the pulse. And thank you, as always, for watching.